Other games may try to sell you on their adrenaline-pumping multiplayer, but none of them can compare to the fast, fluid, kinetic action of Titanfall 2's pilot gameplay. It isn't very often that I play a multiplayer game and find nothing but a few nitpicks to take issue with, but when considering the direction I want to see the franchise take, there are a few ideas and changes that come to mind. The first, and arguably most important, is the time to kill, or TTK. Titanfall 2 has an interesting history of its time to kill. When the game first launched, I felt that the TTK was very fast and certain weapons like the Hemlock and Devotion were so strong and the aim assist was high. But over the course of Titanfall 2's lifecycle, nerfs have been implemented and aim assist has been reduced, leading to a slower TTK. Personally, I like where the time to kill is at now and would like to see it maintained for Titanfall 3. I used to feel really strongly that the TTK should be increased even more, but as I think things through and write them down, I start to realize the problems with this. Titanfall is a high mobility shooter where skilled movement is prioritized over skilled gunplay. I recently watched Late Night Gaming's love letter to Titanfall 2, where in that video he outlined something that was so obvious, yet I never noticed. And it's that the gunplay state and movement state are not separate like they are in almost every other game. In Call of Duty or Battlefield, you move to your enemy, then engage. In Titanfall, you do both at the same time. Titanfall 2's fast kill time helps to encourage this mentality by making fast fluid movement the easiest way to mitigate damage, while staying stationary is an easy way to become a target. The other big issue with the higher time to kill is that I think it would make many of the gunfights in the game really frustrating. With players moving as fast as they do, it can be really easy for them to escape, leaving a very limited window of opportunity for you to secure a kill. Increasing the time to kill even further would only make that window even smaller, and if the time to kill were increased, I feel that the movement speed would need to be decreased to compensate, and I don't think that would be an improvement over what we have now. I think it goes without saying that I don't want to see the time to kill move in the other direction either. In fact, I would probably argue that making the time to kill any faster would be a lot more disastrous than if it was slower. Titanfall gives you just enough health to feel comfortable making aggressive plays, which I think is one of the main reasons why people enjoy the game. If the time to kill was faster, then I feel as though it would cater too much towards passive gameplay. Many players already have an issue with people camping with Spitfires and G2s, but weapon balance is a topic for another video altogether. Since movement is inextricably linked with the time to kill, I think it's important to talk about the mobility systems for Titanfall 3. I love the mobility in Titanfall 2. Not only is movement fast and fluid, but there are so many different ways to move through the environment that are unique and interesting. But my biggest issue with Titanfall 2's mobility system isn't really a problem with the movement itself, but rather the map design. There are many different movement tricks and styles, from grapple slinging and stim launching to slide hopping and eject strafing. The issue that I have with many of the maps in Titanfall 2 is that they overemphasize some movement styles while discouraging others. Take Blackwater Canal for example. Since there's a massive divide in the middle of the map with only one exposed bridge in the middle, grapple becomes the most effective movement technique since it's the most viable way to traverse the map. Now I don't have an issue with grapple or grapple slinging, but the map design discourages the use of many of the other movement options. Wall running and stim are underused on Blackwater Canal since grapple is simply more effective. Or look at Complex. With the roofed interiors, ejecting can feel awkward at times and eject strafing is nearly impossible throughout many parts of the map. Since the map is so horizontal in its layout, the map design encourages players to use stim and slide hopping while discouraging other movement techniques. Now you could argue that these map designs make each map feel unique, but I think the effect is that these maps feel more stale and repetitive. When I play Blackwater Canal or Complex, I know exactly how that game is going to play simply because these maps encourage a specific movement style. Whereas look at maps like Glitch and Wargames. These maps are some of the community's favorite maps since they take advantage of all the different movement styles the game has to offer. Stim, grapple, slide hopping, eject strafing, wall run chaining, and all the other movement tricks are useful and fun for the player to engage with. Now I'm not trying to say that the map designs shouldn't encourage specific movement styles, but rather each map should still make all movement styles viable. Glitch encourages the use of grapple, but that doesn't mean that stim and wall running is a bad option. Another part of Titanfall that I feel could use a few changes is in regards to some of the extra player control related mechanics. Admittedly, this is actually quite a small nitpick, but I feel that it would improve the flow of the game and offer more options to players. One of these options is the ability to hang on walls. It's available for everyone in Titanfall 1, but even then it's underused since it doesn't take long for you to slide off. In Titanfall 2, it's relegated to a specific hit, and I'm not even joking when I say that I've seen a total of 3 people ever using it in the 32 days of playtime I have in multiplayer. The issue with wall hanging is that it has such a niche use in a fast-moving game like Titanfall, but still, I think it's a good option to have in the game. To make it better, I think wall hang should be available to all players without the use of a kit. The other kit options just offer a much better advantage, and relegating it to a kit just dooms the mechanic to never being used. Wall hang should also last indefinitely so that players don't have to keep jumping back into place every so often, and should be toggled on when pressing the crouch button while wall running rather than needing to hold aim down sight. Being able to ADS while wall running is too valuable to give up, not to mention I think that being able to transition between aim down sight and hipfire would be beneficial while wall hanging. Additionally, pressing the sprint button while wall hanging would transition your character back to wall running and give you a boost of speed. If these changes were made, I could see wall hang being useful in 2 different ways. One is for players to hide in unique locations while defending flags and hardpoints, and the other is to throw off enemy players in a similar way to the hover ability, where quickly toggling it on might cause enemies to overcompensate for your movement and turn the tide in a fight. Speaking of hover, I feel it should receive a similar treatment as wall hanging. Instead of being a specific kit, I think it'd be better if all players had access to the ability and could toggle it on with the third press of the jump button after double jumping. I love using the hover kit in Titanfall 2, but I do feel that it is quite a weak kit, especially since it disables your ability to aim down sights while on the move. However, with these changes you could still ADS while moving through the air, and you'll be able to hipfire while hovering. Another option that I wish I had access to is the ability to fire my gun while mantling a ledge. Now I don't want this to be very effective, since the last thing I want to see is a bunch of pilots all sitting on a ledge waiting for someone to walk by before gunning them down and getting a cheap kill. The accuracy should rapidly degrade to ensure that it's ineffective at killing full health pilots, and would only be useful for finishing off low health targets. In addition to this, while firing over the ledge, your character's head and upper body would be exposed, leaving you vulnerable to counterattacks. I can't even count the amount of times I've almost killed an enemy player only for my character to get caught mantling and losing the fight. I know some people have said that this is part of player skill and incentivizing precise movement, and I actually agree with that. Like I said before, this shouldn't be effective against full health targets. If you mess up your movement and end up accidentally mantling next to a healthy pilot, you deserve to lose that fight. This should only be effective at finishing a pilot off, not killing them outright. I feel that this mechanic would reduce some of the frustration associated with mantling, while still keeping the skilled movement element intact. I know these are all really small details, but a lot of time it's the small details that add up to make a great experience. If implemented properly, I feel that these changes and additions could add an additional layer of depth onto Titanfall's already incredible core gameplay. In my opinion, the treatment of tactical abilities is one of Titanfall 2's biggest innovations. Each tactical ability changes your playstyle in a drastic way, which adds to the variety and replayability the game has to offer. In Titanfall 3, I want Respawn to continue building upon the foundation that Titanfall 2 laid. Each tactical ability makes you extremely powerful in one way or another, whether you're launching yourself with grapple, scanning the area with pulse blade, or phasing to safety. I hope that Respawn keeps the mentality that if everyone is overpowered, nobody is overpowered. However, the way that tactical abilities work is far from perfect, and is one of the areas I think Titanfall 3 could greatly improve upon. By far my biggest issue with the tacticals in my opinion is not actually the way they work, but rather the tac-to-kill weapon attachment. I use tac-to-kill on almost all of my weapons, and that right there is the problem. Tac-to-kill is such a good attachment that it's almost a requirement to use. Not only does this hurt weapon customization, but I would argue that it makes the tactical abilities nearly impossible to properly balance. Tac-to-kill is an attachment which injects an unknown variable into the balancing of tactical abilities. That unknown variable is player skill. Essentially what ends up happening is that highly skilled players are able to kill enemies more often, which in turn lets them use their ability more often, which then helps them get even more kills, which then lets them use their ability again, and the cycle just repeats. Tac-to-kill is one of the most egregious offenders of what I think is Titanfall 2's biggest problem: snowballing. It allows the strong to get stronger, while players on the receiving end fall deeper and deeper into a pit they can't hope to climb out of. I fully understand and expect skill to play a role in the effectiveness of abilities, but I think skill should pertain to how the ability is used, rather than how often. While skilled play should reward players for their effort, that reward needs to be reined in to an appropriate level. If you're using Pulse Blade, for example, you can scan an area to find out where the enemy team is. With the tac-to-kill attachment on your weapon, you can then use that information to kill the enemy pilots, recharge the ability, and do it all over again. It's one of these things that you don't really realize how much impact it has until you start paying attention. But for these reasons, I think that tac-to-kill shouldn't return in Titanfall 3. If it does return, I would prefer for it to be a kit, so that players would at least need to sacrifice a kit slot and couldn't stack it with Power Cell. Another issue with the tactical abilities is how imbalanced they are with each other. For the most part, all the tacticals are useful in their own way, but some of them are more useful than others. One could easily separate the tactical abilities into a few different tiers. There's the amazing tier with Grapple and Stim, there's the good tier with Phase Shift and Cloak, there's the annoying tier with AWOL and Pulse Blade, and then there's the Hollow Pilot tier, which has a category of its own for being a complete joke. Now I know that a lot of these abilities either won't be in Titanfall 3 or may be redesigned entirely, but if they are included, I have a few ideas of how I think they could be better balanced with each other. First and foremost, since my vision of Titanfall 3 doesn't have tac-to-kill, the base recharge time of most of the abilities would be decreased so that abilities could be used more often. It's also important to note that Grapple is the most picked ability by a large margin since it's so fun to use, so I think it'd be better to slightly buff the other abilities to make them more enticing. Speaking of Grapple, by default I don't think that Grapple should have 2 charges like it does in Titanfall 2. Now I know Grapple mains are foaming at the mouth from remembering the great Grapple nerf of 2017, but don't worry, this is different. Instead of Grapple having dedicated charges, Grapple could be used during any state of its recharge time. However, if used on low charge, the grapple effect wouldn't last as long as it does with full charge. This would add a bit more critical thought to the use of grapple, where players could use the full charge for one big swing or multiple smaller swings. Grapple would also have a much faster recharge time to allow players to have nearly constant use. Grapple would go from an ability that you occasionally use to jumpstart your movement into an ability which you can integrate into all your movement at any given time. Next up is Stim. Stim is a great utility that is useful for players of all skill levels, and I don't really want to see the ability change too much. It's a near perfect tactical that does exactly what you want it to, and it's a solid and reliable choice. The only change I would like to see would be for Stim to grant a small amount of bonus health when used at full HP. solidifying its role as the aggressive rusher's tactical. The reason for this is to differentiate Stim from Grapple, without reducing the effectiveness or fun factor from Grapple. Stim would be ideal for rushing into objectives and pairing with shotguns or SMGs. It would still grant you an excellent speed boost and can be used for quick escapes as well. Cloak is an ability which does exactly what you expect it to. It isn't particularly interesting, but it's useful in this given situation. To make it even more useful, I think Cloak shouldn't instantly wear off when shooting your weapons. Rather, I think the duration of Cloak should be reduced whenever you fire. If you fire a lot of rounds, your Cloak will wear off really quickly, but if you have good trigger discipline, you can make it last a little bit longer. I also feel that it would be a good idea if the effects of the low-profile kit were integrated into Cloak by default. In addition to this, I think Cloaked Pilot should be completely invisible to enemies who are looking through a particle wall or AWOL to give it a bit more utility. Speaking of AWOL, in its current state, AWOL is easily the most hated tactical ability in the game. But I actually really like AWOL in concept, just not its execution. To put it simply, I think that AWOL should essentially be replaced by the hardcover boost. It would no longer amp outgoing shots, and players could easily identify how damaged a shield is by its color. The wall would also last for a shorter duration, but have a much quicker recharge time. The reason for this is because a lot of times I place an AWOL but I can't find anything to shoot, which causes an odd situation where I don't want to leave my wall, but at the same time, I'm not really doing anything. Now I know some people will say that AWOL should just be removed from the game entirely, but I would actually disagree. In a game which emphasizes quick movement, I think an ability which allows you to restrict enemy movement is actually something quite valuable to have in this sandbox. In Titanfall 2, my issue with how it's implemented mostly revolves around how it amps your shots. But still, Titanfall 2 has plenty of options for players to counter it, such as the Gravity Star and Fire Star, and with the improvements to Cloak, I think this ability could easily be reined in to an appropriate level. Pulse Blade is up next, but I don't think this ability needs any major changes. Besides the baseline recharge time decrease, I feel that Pulse Blade would fit very well into Titanfall 3. The only change I would make is a small quality of life improvement. When using Pulse Blade in a game of like Attrition, the sonar pulse highlights everything, which can be very confusing. I often can't tell whether I'm looking at a grunt, stalker, or pilot, since everything is glowing with the same bright orange color. Instead, I think that pilot should be highlighted red to differentiate them from all the minions. It's a small change, I know, but I think it would make Pulse Blade a bit more comfortable for players to use. Last, and certainly least, we have the Holo Pilot. Now, I'm not really sure if this ability can be saved, considering that in every game with a similar ability, it's utterly useless as well. But there are a few improvements that might be able to make it viable. The first buff will be for the hologram to have the appearance of a randomly selected ability type so that it isn't so obvious, as well as firing fake bullets to seem a bit more convincing. Then, if a player shot at it, they'd be marked in a similar fashion to Pulse Blade. This would give players a practical advantage, since as it stands right now, all Holopilot does is alert players that an enemy is nearby. If anything, Holopilot is often a hindrance rather than being an advantage. Now, if you guys would indulge me for a minute, I had an idea for a completely new tactical ability that I think could work quite well in Titanfall 3, and it's actually quite simple in concept. What if players had access to a jump pack ability that would allow them to perform a triple jump? However, this wouldn't just be an ordinary jump. The direction your character would jump towards would be determined by the position of your movement thumbstick or keybind, rather than where you are currently going. In addition to this, the triple jump would maintain your current vertical and horizontal momentum without any loss of speed. This ability would allow you to quickly change your direction in a moment's notice, and with precise timing, it could allow you to quickly strafe jump in combat or duck into cover. I think it would probably need a fairly quick recharge time to ensure that it's as viable as the other abilities, but I think it would both help new players with their movement, and veteran players with making snappy skill-based plays. Granted, I haven't put too much thought into how this ability would affect map design or gunplay, so I can understand that it may not work well depending on how Titanfall 3 plays. In any case, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on this idea down in the comments section below. And that pretty much wraps it up for this video. I was actually quite surprised with how short this video ended up being, which I think is a testament to how much I enjoy Titanfall's pilot gameplay. I don't think that there are many changes that really need to be made from a baseline pilot gameplay perspective. The weapon balance, on the other hand, is a bit of a different story, so be sure to look out for the next part in this series, which will cover weapons, ordnance, and boosts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode.